Hi, my name is Greg Holmes, and today I'd like to talk to you about the Leadership Professional Development Plan for Fall 2003. Before we get into it, I wanted to give you just a little bit about me before we dive into our topic. So, I've been working for about the past 15 years. My early formative years in my career were focused on the advertising space, where I worked within client services as well as led teams internally back at the ad agencies on executing client strategies and providing finished products for branding campaigns. After 5 years in advertisement, I moved into search and became a recruiter. And since then, I've recruited at all different levels, whether it's junior designers through executive leadership. I've been working in bullpens back to back with my salespeople in a heavily focused team environment, and most recently was at Facebook, where I focused on non-technical leadership hiring, as well as a ton of cross-functional collaboration with partners across the country, as well as across the pond in Europe. Today, I'd like to begin with speaking with you about teamwork, and we'll be going over a few sections today. Section 1 will be functioning as a team of leaders, and Section 2 will be teaching teamwork to your subordinates. So again, this topic or theme for today is teaching leaders how to function as a team, as well as how they teach teamwork when they're not around to their subordinates. Finally, we'll do a quick wrap up at the end. Before we hop into today's topics, I want to do a quick activity about comfort zones. And when we think about comfort zones in leadership, it's very easy to think about essentially as leaders, we're comfortable doing things a certain way. And that's okay. Doesn't mean it's also we've had success, but we need to reshape our thinking in terms of finding opportunities to grow as leaders and begin relying on our peers as vehicles for growth. So with this activity of comfort zones, imagine, if you will, 3 circles. And one circle that we can all start in is our main comfort zone. This is where we feel confident and capable and in our most secure environment. The next circle, which can be a little bit further out from that, could be considered that more sweaty palms zone, right? We're not totally shut off from performing an activity or maybe asking for help, but it's producing anxiety and grit and dread in some instances. Finally, the furthest out circle would be considered our panic zone, where we are just shut down from the idea of, again, asking for help or relying on others. So, when you think about comfort zones as leaders, let's do 2 things. Let's do a fun thing and then think about it as leaders. That first thing, the fun thing, my example for you would be, let's say a group of friends is asking you, hey, do you want to go skydiving? Do you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane? Ask yourself, how comfortable are you with that idea? Which of these circles, the ultimately comfortable one, the sweaty palm ones, or the panic zone one, which circle do you find yourself in? For me personally, I would be in the comfort zone. I've done it before. I want to do it again. It's going to be a birthday present. My wife will be afraid, but we will have fun. That's not going to be true for everybody. I have got plenty of friends, plenty of people in my life. I just mentioned my wife who doesn't understand it. Let's use her. She would be in the panic zone. Not for me. I will be in the car. I am cheering you on. You do you. My challenge would then be, well, how do I create a bridge to my partner to appear, potentially? How do I create a bridge that will help them feel comfortable? And likewise, what if it was me in that panic zone and a fellow leader was comfortable, or in this case, a friend was comfortable skydiving? What type of bridge could be extended to me to make me feel comfortable so that we can function and enjoy the day together? That works for skydiving. When you think about comfort zones in leadership, let's say, for example, you have to discipline a subordinate. Where do you land in comfort zones? Are you freaked out and panicking and dreading that moment? You don't want to do it. Can we just move on? Sweaty palms, but you think you can figure it out, or I can do this. Watch me work. Where do you end up? For me, I would personally be in the panic zone. I do not like confrontation. My anxiety would be through the roof. But do I have a leader, a peer of mine on my team that I could rely on who is very comfortable? Ask yourself, how comfortable are you? Are you going to be able to be the one that offers bridges or olive branches to leaders who maybe don't find this area so comfortable, even if it is just a sweaty palms thing? Or are you going to be able to ask for help for leaders? What would be an impactful statement to you that would bring you to a comfort zone? Things to consider when we talk about functioning as a team of leaders. Now let's dive into functioning as a team of leaders here. Really, a lot of this is involved with collaborative team leadership, which is essentially a management practice that aims to bring everybody together. It could be managers, executives, and general staff away from siloed environments, workplace silos, rather, right? Collaborative leaders are going to be ones that really focus on seeking a well-rounded look at different opinions, a diversity of opinions, right? Ideas among teammates to build strategies, solve problems, reduce tensions in the workplace, do it through a team effort versus trying to figure it out yourself. And as a result, we see that when employees are exposed to collaborative team leadership, they tend to feel more engaged, they feel empowered because leadership will trust them, and they're more likely to take ownership of that work. Now, I mentioned to you, workplace silos. Is this a familiar term for you? The idea of workplace silos? What comes to mind when you think of silos? You're driving down the road and you are driving by a farm and you see a silo. What type of shape comes to mind there? You think about it when you see those big grain towers, right? All that food locked away in very steel containers. You could think about information within workplace silos kind of the same way, right? So that's what a silo is. It refers to the hoarding of information, not sharing it with others. And typically these silos happen because of things like poor communication in the workplace or internal systems that are way too complicated so we can't get messaging out, or it just becomes too difficult to share information. These silos, when they're active, and maybe you've been exposed to them in the past, can truly impair the ability for a team of leaders to function. Maybe a leader has access to a certain platform, and we all need access, but we don't have enough licenses to go around, and as a result of not enough licenses, a cog in our system is developed, and ultimately our customers suffer, right? That's a workplace silo coming against us here. Not only can we not help our end customers, but we cannot execute the mission of what we're trying to accomplish here as a business. What about for you? What type of silos come into place for your own workplace? Write them down, keep them close. Let's revisit them as we go through this presentation here, because I've got a number of silos that I'd like to tell you about, and maybe you can start categorizing here, and we'll talk through some ways you can overcome those. So one example of a silo is called an organizational silo. And these are when organizations are typically too hierarchical or maybe over-specified. If you think about, well, one example I could give you would be my advertising agency days. Working in client services, oftentimes it would be me in front of a client pitching work that we could do. And as a result of those moments, sometimes clients would say, well, can you do this? Can you do that? Are you capable of this? Can we ask that of your team? And it was a very gray area, because if I would say yes, not knowing what my agency is actually capable of or what my team can actually do for this client, that can be a really slippery slope. So again, organizational silos. Examples of that are when promises are made to customers that can't ultimately be delivered. Another type of silo is called an information silo. Pretty straightforward here, right? This is an idea when departments aren't properly recording or sharing information. And what type of problems can happen, do you think, when information isn't properly recorded or documented or integrated into new platforms? It's lost. And an example of that can be too many communication tools. Have you ever worked in an environment where leadership had messaging that they wanted to share with staff, and there were 8 to 9 to what feels like 100 different ways the messaging was rolled out across so many different platforms. I know I've been in that moment, and it becomes tough when you're trying to keep up with what tool has what message with it. Some examples could be things like Slack channels or Google Chat, email, text, internal employee portals, project management applications, you name it, the list can really continue on and on. And as a leader, can you imagine trying to keep track of all those, or let alone the staff trying to keep track of all these different messaging platforms that are coming out? The inverse problem can also be when not enough of these are in place. So when you're reflecting on this type of workplace silo, the information silo, it's all about striking a balance about how many channels need to have this message, how easily can we get this message out as leaders and create a more unified approach to this messaging. And we'll touch on that unified part in just a little bit here. It's also up here, the silo mentality. This is when employees at any and all levels of an organization don't really see the value in knowledge sharing, even if it would be useful to others. Have you ever been around an employee who maybe had some super intrinsic knowledge? Maybe it was from a grandfathered in system that they were the only ones that really know how to do it. It could have been like an operating system. Could have been a switchboard. Who knows? But there are definitely some more early on knowledge that is good to capture when we can here, as long as we can get over the silo mentality. Sometimes employees are only rewarded based on achieving certain performance-based goals, right? So they hold on to all that knowledge, and yet when we think about what that can lead when it's one person holding on to all this knowledge and that's then incentivized by performance, well, what do you think can happen to a person like that? Burnout. Yeah. Burnout leads to turnover. It leads to lower opinions about the workplace here. I know I've experienced it. I would ask yourself, have you ever experienced some burnout or fatigue from a role? I would imagine most of us have. And at the end of the day, some silos, such as the hierarchical ones or the creation of specialized departments, those are frankly unavoidable. It's impossible to have a perfect business structure, and it's important that we acknowledge that here. What we can do is openly discuss these silos, and by doing so, teams can now be exposed to areas that they can improve upon, whether it's through communications or tool processes. But again, they can acknowledge and make efforts to make sure that the place of silos is reduced in the workplace. And even though we do consider silos in general as a negative, flip your thinking. Think about the identification of silos as an opportunity for improvement. So now that we understand workplace silos, let's consider opportunities that leaders have to reduce silos in the workplace and instead demonstrate cohesiveness and teamwork. Beginning with an example, it would be knowledge sharing. Now, knowledge sharing is a critical component of knowledge management. The definition of the knowledge management piece is generally referred to as the way that an organization creates and shares, also retains knowledge throughout a business. Knowledge sharing, in that vein, is how individuals exchange what's called tacit knowledge, which is skills and abilities and other knowledge items that individuals only gain through experience, as well as explicit knowledge, which are things related to maybe like documentation. It could be onboarding tools and processes, how-tos, such as like employee handbooks, that sort of thing. The use of those helps us create new knowledge, right? So we've got two versions here. We've got tacit and explicit knowledge. When we treat knowledge sharing as an important part of a business, it not only will enable organizations to develop new skills and competencies, it will also increase the value that these businesses can provide to their customers, as well as helps them sustain a competitive advantage against their competitors. Now, this could be things like intangible assets that are held onto a business, or the development of new routines and processes. I'll ask you, in your own work experience, what are some examples of either tacit or explicit knowledge that was shared with you from another leader in the guise of helping you develop in your own job? Something to think about. Moving on, unified leadership. I mentioned this earlier on. Unified leadership defined as how we can stimulate collaboration and how this really starts with managers communicating with each other and essentially that famous phrase of getting on the same page. And it's fair to acknowledge that while different teams will ultimately serve different functions or different styles of customers throughout the business, it's important to impart on us as leaders here that we are all part of the same company, working underneath the same goals and strategy across the business, no matter the line that we're working on. Doesn't matter if you're high level management, mid level, lower level management. The idea is we're all working together to create the same support structure for the employees that report up to us to ultimately support the company's bigger picture. So again, another question for you. What are some ways in which unified leadership may be helpful for subordinates? I know one example for me, just kicking off conversation, would be that when there's one message, I know what this company stands for. That's very clear all the way from the top. And a strong vision with a strong sense of values ultimately gives workers a shared purpose. Cross-functional collaboration, right? This is really focused on teams coming from different backgrounds, creating a more dynamic and creative environment that is ripe with challenges people are more looking forward to overcoming versus running away from. Giving access to mixed perspectives means people are more likely to want to collaborate and problem solve. In the workplaces that practice this style of diverse thinking and a focus on inclusion of others towards a common goal, also are going to find themselves sharing information more freely. They may be more resilient to challenges, both seen and unforeseen, and ultimately reach solutions faster. Educating, training, and working together. That's the last part of this section 1 here, right? We think about, as leaders, how we can train each other, how we can work together, lead by example through collaboration, all in the goal and the vein of increasing our productivity. Collaboration not only builds social connection, but it'll improve everybody's understanding and everybody's winning together mentality. Ultimately is a sense of belonging for everybody, a shared sense of belonging. All right, we'll do a quick break here. Stand up, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, get some water, and we'll come back in just a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, now that we're back, let's move to section 2, teaching teamwork to those that report up to us. As we hop into this one here, I really want to make sure it's understandable that we can all appreciate the idea that teamwork can be very stressful, right? It's a goal that we all have, but it can be stress-inducing not only for leaders, but also members of those teams that report up to us alike. This stress may appear through conflicts, whether it's between two people on a team or from team to team. People may feel enhanced pressure to complete deadlines and maintain a certain standard that isn't ultimately in their control, like it would be for a solo project. Resources may be a bit more scarce, and by resources being more scarce, increases in demand, potential conflict can arise. There could be other factors too that can threaten teams' effectiveness and success, and we'll dive into areas here about how we can overcome those challenges. As we do that though, another activity for you, leaders in action. What I'd like you to do is spend a few minutes thinking about a leader that you admire, either living or non-living. Reflect on why that person matters to you, and then share some traits about what led to your selection. Keep that close to you. For me, I took some time to reflect, and a leader that came to mind for me is Martin Luther King Jr. And when I think about what traits came to mind about why I picked MLK Jr., it's because the mission and his goal of what he was speaking on was met with so much authenticity. It was intoxicating. It was so easy to be on board with treating human beings as simply the right thing to do. And that focus on, as we win together and we improve society together, it's important that we're doing it together and embracing people of all backgrounds, not excluding people because of how they may look. MLK's words still resonate to this day. So for a leader, for me, that's someone I look up to a lot. How about you? What leaders stand out to you? What traits of theirs are you trying to work towards incorporating into your actions at work? Okay, let's move on into section 2, teaching teamwork. And we'll begin with discussing about what goes into managing an effective team here. Beginning with good leadership. This is one of the most enduring aspects of a job that impacts worker satisfaction, right? A leader that they work for, who they believe in. Now, if you consider what differentiates a good leader and a bad leader, it's that ability to lead for the most part. This could look like how motivation is doled out to employees, how efforts are rewarded, how leaders lead by example and serve as role models, and set a tone for the organization when it comes time to complete tasks. A boss's leadership ability is apt to impact how employees view their job and whether they'd like to be there for a long time. And if they're there for a long time, that helps us with one of our biggest challenges in today's working world. What is it? Turnover. One way a leader can effectively lead is taking the time to get to know their team, not only on a personal level, but really understanding their strengths and their weaknesses and their desires for their own careers and their goals. So as a leader, I would encourage you to spend time with your subordinates to really understand why they're working for your company and what type of leadership will resonate with them. Ask them the question about what type of leaders they look up to. You may be surprised at what you hear. Clear communication is another huge part, and that really comes in many forms. If you think about the different ways that we communicate in the workplace today, what are some ways that come to mind? I know for me, some of them that came to mind when I asked myself that question, things like print and digital, right? Ways that we can proactively address members of our team, how we can proactively address conflicts, all these ways that we can ensure that our teammates and our subordinates know that there are open lines of communication and a number of platforms available to them so that they can receive proper direction as well as impact other areas important to the team and the overall business. When they see an opportunity to grow in that manner, there's an opportunity also for us to build trust in the team. Team members should be receiving accurate, well thought out feedback when regarding their performance on a regular basis. A great way to consider reducing anxiety at work, if we consider something like the performance appraisal process, is making sure that performance is graded on a regular basis and that feedback is provided in a timely manner related to that moment versus waiting for one singular moment about a calendar year. When we're able to communicate more regularly with really clear standards, we're setting a level of accountability across the business here so that people know where they stand and what it means to operate effectively at any given time. It also lets each person know in almost real time areas of improvement that would really help the company and the team. Role establishment. Emphasizing to teams that they must agree on who will do what can be vital to a team's success. Agreements such as these can help teams avoid confusion later on in the process and offer them an opportunity to establish clear lines of responsibility. So if you ask yourself, and maybe this is something that was done at one point in school, or it could have been during your career, but what's a way that we can establish roles and maintain role clarity throughout the duration of a project? I would encourage you to think about documentation being on that path. Creating rolling agendas that include assigned responsibilities that are reviewed each session. Creating a charter that everybody signs up for that delineates clear levels of responsibility and accountability and task assignment. Those are ways that roles can be clearly established early on, and then when we're at the 80% mark, we can review and make sure we're all on that same page, as we talked about early on with leaders teaching leaders. We're all on the same page about who will be doing what and make sure that we're staying as effective as possible and that our teams are also being as effective as possible. Offering support. Ask yourself, what are some ways that you have felt supported from a leader or that support has been demonstrated from leadership? What does that look like to you? Usually it comes in the form of one of three things, either resources or general encouragement, or in some cases, recognition. I'd like to think about the psychological contract, which is essentially when people sign up with a business to work together, right? The business agrees that, yes, we will provide financial compensation, and here's what your compensation package will look like in exchange for your services to the organization. Both parties agree, an offer is made and accepted. We're on the same page about what that looks like. The business has outlined resources. The business has said as this offer indicates, we believe that you can do this job. So we're getting recognition and encouragement. And here are the keys. Go to it. This contract and its implications on performance appraisal and the management process with team members can oftentimes lead to strong team dynamics and success because of people feeling supported early on. Respect for one another. Again, I'll ask you, what are some ways in which team members can display respect towards one another? I would argue things like active listening, essentially maintaining eye contact while we're listening, encouragement towards one another, acknowledging feelings are a real part of team processes. When there's conflict, proactively going out of our way to resolve it, as well as avoiding hostile or blaming language towards teammates, right? So as a leader, making sure that our team understands how they can show respect for one another, whether it's simply completing the task, but also how we treat each other, how your team treats one another. Trust. Leaders who empower their team, maybe through giving them some control, will ultimately increase the level of trust. Both leaders trusting their team and that the team now feeling like leaders trust them and therefore going out of their way to want to achieve the goals. If we think about micromanagers, their refusal to delegate responsibilities or empower their teams may signal that they don't trust their team and that they're creating what's called powerlessness, which is essentially making others less trusting of their ability to do a job and more reliant on the manager to just do everything. And that's not anything anybody would want to do. As a leader, going out of your way or explicitly letting your team know that you trust them will have many benefits, including reduced anxiety related to a sense of failure, therefore increasing risk tolerance or avoiding conformity, i.e., teams may avoid doing what's just been done in the past the safe way and may say, why don't we challenge our way of thinking? Why don't we find an opportunity to grow? Teams may also feel encouraged to support one another in the form of let's take a risk together because of that emphasis on the team taking the risk versus just in one person. It tends to be that research will indicate that if a leader's behavior suggests that accountability for whether it's success or for failure is more on the team and less on the individual, that research indicates people will be more likely to take that chance of risk. For me, I've worked in a very low trust environment. I'll bring up my advertising days again. This is actually what led me away from advertising. I worked for an agency where at one point I was empowered to lead a lot of the execution for General Mills digital platforms for brands such as Toaster Strudel. And while that sounds great, there's a lot of pressure on that moment too and a lot of visibility. And as such, leadership came in as micromanaging every single thing. I can't even begin to tell you the different ways I was micromanaged. What I can tell you, it led to powerlessness, where instead of being interrupted at meetings, I just chose to be quiet. Or instead of building presentations, I told leaders, here's when it's due, and I've created a bare bones structure. Can you please take it from here because I don't know what to do? Leaders weren't happy about it, and there may have been other factors in there, but essentially that feeling of powerlessness due to a lack of trust really inhibited our ability to grow the brand and maintain the business, and ultimately it led me into a different career path. So hopefully you haven't experienced anything like that. If you have, by us talking about today, maybe there's a way to rebound from that. When you put these things together that we've talked about, these effective team characteristics, your team can look something like what you see here on the slide in front of you. Roles within a team are held by members who are competent in their capabilities and they're able to complete their tasks. Their goals are clear and there's no questioning commitment to said goals from all team members due to that constant reflection. Empowerment shines bright, and all people feel comfortable sharing thoughts and ideas and opinions that pushes out of the what have we always done to what can we do differently. If you ask yourself, what does empowerment look like on a team? Or when have you felt empowered by a leader and how that influenced your ability to achieve your own goals? What does that look like for you? Hold on to that moment. Think about that moment. Write it down. Find ways to pay that sense of empowerment forward. Think about ways that we can create empowerment within the teams that report to us. If you're able to do that, you may find that team members will continue being open to new ideas, and they may invite thoughtful debate on existing ideas with a shared goal to push the narrative forward to provide the strongest outcome in the best interest of the business. My final takeaways for you are as follows. Through collaborative leadership, managers and executives can create inclusive environments that have an ability to energize the teams and unlock creativity and create a work culture that's both productive and joyful. Teams are able to function on their own with very little oversight due to that empowerment that we've talked about. They will feel empowered, they will feel trusted, and they'll have a clear sense of expectations from leadership. That sense of trust is super paramount throughout the organization, and that leads to a sense of relationship equity, both within team members as well as between leadership and general staff. It's a very strong feeling. Thank you again for your time today. I look forward to any and all questions or concerns and some follow-up commentary. Take care.